Hi, my name is Justin Long-Moton, and I'm a student at the University of Oklahoma in the Masters of Arts in Global Affairs program. The following presentation is part of a larger research project for the course Political Economy of China. The presentation is entitled Counterfeiting China, the Political and Cultural Promotion of Fake Goods. I'd like to begin this presentation with a quote from the Prada Group CEO. He states in an interview, "Fake goods aren't totally bad. At least it created jobs at some counterfeit factories. We don't want to be a brand that nobody wants to copy." The People's Republic of China has positioned itself as the second largest economy in the world, behind only the United States. China has become the largest trading country in the world, operating under the unofficial moniker World Manufacturer. From an international perspective, China is the world's most important manufacturer and industrial producer. While China has begun to situate itself as the leader within the international community based on unprecedented economic growth, there are aspects of the Chinese financial model, and more specifically policy, that has not caught up to the standards of the developed world. The issue of intellectual property rights, or IPR, infringement has not only caused tremendous revenue losses, but also created a level of resentment held by members of the international community toward China. Unchecked IPR violations has caused governments and private companies to reassess their investment strategies when it comes to this developing nation. Now that I've laid the groundwork for the situation that we're dealing with, I'd like to pose my research question. In this presentation, I'll be seeking to answer the following. Has China completely ignored the rampant counterfeiting taking place within its domestic borders, or is its political climate and Chinese culture the ultimate culprit for hindered progress? It is my belief that China has indeed made attempts to rectify the situation. However, the overall structure of the Chinese government, coupled with Chinese culture, has negated true progress, enabling the issue to continue thriving. Before providing evidence to support this claim, I'd like to provide some statistical examples of the magnitude of the issue at hand and China's involvement. The two charts depicted on the right-hand side of the slide are taken from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in their report entitled Trade in Counterfeit and Pirated Goods, Mapping the Economic Impact. So the chart on the right, entitled Where Most Fake Goods Originate, indicates that in 2013, 63.2% of all total seizures originated from China, while in 2013, in regards to the countries hit hardest by the trade in fake goods, so these are the countries whose IPR rights are infringed, China is only 1%. So this indicates that these goods are coming from China, being manufactured and developed in China, and being distributed to the rest of the world. However, when it comes to Chinese products, there is very little copying being done on these Chinese products in comparison. Additionally, I'd like to provide some more statistics to show the magnitude of the problem and China's role in that. Additionally, in 2013, in regards to counterfeit goods, 2.5% of world trade, which is equivalent to the combined GDP of Ireland and the Czech Republic. So this is the amount of counterfeit goods that were represented in 2013. Additionally, in 2015, the Republic of China, they were the source economy for counterfeit and pirated goods seized with a value of up to 697 million. And that's a quite astounding number if you really think about it. So next, I'd like to dive right into Chinese culture and how this may impact China's role in counterfeiting. The term shanzai has become a sort of a Chinese phenomenon. And here on the slide, we refer to shanzai as roughly mass-produced imitation goods, which has created the Chinese landscape that is littered with products considered to be a copycat, guerrilla counterfeits, and knockoffs, essentially all the work of thieves. But additionally, Other sources have this term Shanzai being referring to originally as a bandit stronghold outside government control, and then it transitioned into representing fake goods. So if we are to consider the original definition, as truth, it shed lights on the preservation of the issue because from a societal standpoint, shanzai or counterfeit goods, they cannot be regulated by the government. However, if we look at some of the reasons why individuals may promote this shanzai and why it's become such a phenomenon within Chinese culture, it's because they potentially mitigate the impacts of income inequality because they provide lower income earners with access to shadow market of goods that resemble desirable products otherwise beyond their reach. So essentially, these copycat goods provide individuals that did not necessarily have the means to attain the original, provide similar products. Additionally, if we're still considering Chinese culture, it's important to note that the Chinese, they do not believe in natural rights, justice, or natural law, which leads to a difference in IPR. A difference in opinion over IPR. So there's little emphasis placed on individual rights and more placed on communal interest. So within Chinese culture, the individual rights essentially reflect the shared rights of the community as a whole. Um, so now we'll consider exactly what China has done in regards to their policies. So China became a member of the World Intellectual Property Organization in 1980, the Paris Convention for the Protection of Industrial Property in 1985, and the Madrid Agreement for the International Registration of Trademarks in 1989. In 1992, it signed a bilateral agreement with the United States for copyright protection, and in 1995, it signed the Sino-US Agreement on Intellectual Property Rights. So here, these ratification and alignment with these different organizations and countries shows China has committed itself to basically addressing the issue of IPR violations. So they haven't sat idly by. Additionally, there's been several campaigns to combat IPR infringement. One of note took place between October 2010 and June 2011. And here, the overall goal was investigating illegal printing, copying of publication, software, music, and just to really intensify criminal and judicial IPR enforcements. And this was the overarching goal of this one specific campaign initiated by the the then primer. But one last thing, I guess, that China has done, they've also in 2015 began to address e-commerce law. So basically the distribution of counterfeit goods online. And here I want to highlight the efforts being undertaken by both the private as well as the government sector, because while the government began to develop a comprehensive economics law which highlights their commitment to the protection of IPR, the Alibaba Group, they also introduced two new policies which were aimed at IPR protections on the web. And so internal investigations indicated that there were some illegal businesses on the platforms, and then Alibaba thus decided to address it with the implementation of these two policies. So these actions being taken clearly indicate that China has committed itself to addressing these issues. Next, I'd like to consider the political intervention. So first, we'll begin with the state strategically cracking down on specific industries like tobacco and alcohol markets to support the monopolization of these markets by SOEs. So essentially, through my research, I came across a case study in which a case study of Chinese IP criminal cases in which 49.4% of the victims were SOEs, while 88.5% of the victims were domestic corporate victims. So the large discrepancy in percentages indicate that the Chinese government they utilize IP law as a tool for regulating specific industries. So they crack down on industries, as I mentioned, like tobacco and alcohol, to support the monopolization. So in in an effort to crack down, they're essentially enforcing IPR when it suits their own interests. And this highlights a problem, that being corruption. There's an unbalanced criminalization of specific offenders in order to meet state aims. Next bullet point, we highlight the negotiations held at the international level, which reveal China political players they fear being held responsible for IPR infringement due to stalled economic growth. And this is the overarching theme of developing nations. They essentially believe that being able to continue their IPR violation practices further promotes their economies, and having to crack down on this would ultimately hinder economic progress. Next, we'll consider the constant conflict between the central government and local governments concerning the emphasis placed on eradicating the issue of counterfeiting goods. So here we see two forces working against each other. You have the central government, which has implemented and proposed policies to combat this issue in direct, and then you have in direct conflict with this immense activity undertaken by the central government and inactivity of the local governments. Governments at the local level, they've been passive about IPR infringement when counterfeiting goods have a major presence or contribute to employment. So at the local level, counterfeiting goods and counterfeit manufacturing promotes growth and sustains the local government and local level economies. And as a result, the local governments there don't want to disrupt such progress. And here, this is where the conflict between these two central and local governments take place. And lastly, in regards to political intervention, we would like to consider the lack of centralized enforcement mechanisms in the form of agencies within the Chinese governmental structure. So here, we see that there is really no concentration of power under one enforcement agency. There's multiple agencies, and as a result, authority is convoluted, and the various agencies are then susceptible to corruption, and they operate solely in the advancements of self-interest. So implementation is not equal across the board, which would then aid to the preservation of the problem. So now that I've highlighted the cultural and political aspects to the issue, I think I've really shown light on the fact that China has not ignored the problem. However, just the political climate and culture from a historical perspective just aids the problem to continually persevere. So in conclusion, the goal of eradication of intellectual property right infringement within society is not simply a matter of China's government being unwilling to intervene. The government certainly plays a role in its preservation, as was described in the passive approach by the local governments, which take combating the problem. However, the true issue lies within the China's history and institutions. China has demonstrated an ability to enforce IPR as well as formalize its commitment through this ratification of trade agreements in alignment with specific international institutions. The continuance of the problem is not due to complete disregard, rather a combination of cultural aspects and conflicting government agendas. Disregard would be expressed if there was little being done to combat the issue, and we see that this is clearly not the case. There are several factors internal to China working against progress, which creates the perception of disregard. China suffers from the same ailments of other developing nations, and when coupled with a cultural history not founded on rights, it comes as no surprise that progress is slow. But here, the key note I do want to highlight in closing is that progress, though slow, is being made. Thank you.